Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is James. I work here in the Education Department at the Long Beach Aquarium of the Pacific. Does this look like our topic for today? No. We're going to talk about deep sea. Is this the deep sea? Not quite. We're going to make observations. We're going to ask questions. This is your opportunity to ask me questions about deep ocean stuff. Not just deep thinking, but deep in the ocean. And you can text us right here at 562-286-1838. Text rates do apply, so make sure if you're one of our younger viewers, you have an adult help you. But you can also email us questions at live@lbaop.org. Now, Amanda's on question control, so if you ask a really tough one, Amanda might have to Google some answers for me. But we also have Carrie helping out. Carrie's going to help with all the pictures behind me here. But what makes this different from what we're talking about today? Why wouldn't we consider this a deep ocean habitat? I mean, I'm not great at diving, so I probably wouldn't be able to get to the bottom of this one, and it's not that deep. So what do we mean by deep ocean? Let's make some quick observations. What do you know about deep ocean things? What are some terms you've heard before? You can share with your friends around you. You can text them in to Amanda, or you can, even if you want to, you can shout them out to the TV, and maybe I'll still hear you. Have you heard of something called the midnight zone and the sunlight zone, and the one in the middle is called the twilight zone? Not a TV show, but a range of the ocean. Well, those are some terms a lot of people use to talk about these different depths. So there's different sections of the ocean we can talk about. Open water stuff is called pelagic. Now, these fish are in the open water. They're not sitting on the floor. If you were a crab or a snail or a clam, you'd be sitting on the ocean floor. So we can even talk about different depths of the ocean based off of if you're in the open water, like our sea turtle behind my head here, or if you're like the coral who have to sit on the floor. We're going to talk about just everything in the deep. So there's a lot of terms you've probably heard, but we're going to focus on some of the deep ocean habitats where there's not a lot of light. After about 200 meters or a little over 600 feet, there's not much light that's left. The light that comes through the ocean bounces off a lot of particles or gets blocked by a lot of stuff. And so the amount of light is absorbed the farther in you go. And one of the interesting things is that the wavelengths or colors of light become less and less visible from the sun. Have you ever held a prism up and you can get the rainbow across the other side of the room? Yeah. So all of the sunlight that we get on the planet will give us the different colors. Now, as we get deeper in the ocean, more and more of those colors are absorbed from the sunlight. And so we see less and less things from the sunlight. Now, the blue and the green light is some of the deepest penetrating sunlight. That's why some things glow very specific colors. When you think of bioluminescence, things that glow in the dark, what colors do those animals tend to glow? Are they pink and orange and red? Not usually, because those colors disappear pretty quickly in the depth. There's not a lot of things that are pink and orange and red unless they want to hide, because that becomes a form of camouflage. I'll talk about that later. But the things that glow in the dark are a couple of different colors. Have you figured out what they are? Let's have Carrie show us some glow-in-the-dark fun. And why don't you tell me what colors we're finding? Now, don't worry about who this is, because this is a very different kind of animal than you've probably seen before, because it's living in the deep ocean. It's wicked dark down there. What color is this? It's blue. Remember we said blue and green get to the deepest parts of the ocean? So those colors have the highest amount of energy, so they can go the farthest in the water. Well, the cool thing is a lot of these organisms can also see in ultraviolet light. So if you remember your rainbow spectrum, right? Roy G. Biv, red, orange, well, from your perspective, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Well, on your side, looking in, the blues and the violets, then there's ultraviolet. Those have a lot of energy from the sun, and they can get the farthest in. And so a lot of these things are looking into a different color wavelength than we can see. So the blues, the greens, the ultraviolets, that's stuff that they can see. So a lot of these animals, they have to use these colors to communicate, to ward off a predator, to attract a prey item so they can eat it, or sometimes it's to find other members of your own species. So these bioluminescent color patterns sometimes help with just about anything you need to do in the deep ocean where there's not really any sunlight. So remember, after about 200 meters, over 90+% of sunlight, you can't see it anymore. It's pretty dark. Most of the sunlight is absorbed after 1,000 meters, and that's only about 3,300, 3,400 feet. That's less than a mile. So it gets pretty dark down there. So a lot of animals have adapted special ways to communicate. Now, we had a really interesting question come in. How do the fish and plants get energy if they don't have any sunlight? Good connection. So up here where it's lots of light, plants, algae, they make energy from the sun. They use photosynthesis. So if you were a plant, you just hang out in the sunlight, and you get energy. Because naturally inside, your cells, your parts of your body, are making energy from that. Well, other things are doing it a different way. These organisms all live around a hydrothermal vent. It's a really hot smokestack, essentially. And it's not smoke. It's spewing out a lot of different chemicals that are okay for them, but they would be toxic to us. Now, instead of using sunlight to get energy, they're making energy from the chemicals around them. That is a different kind of energy-making process we call chemosynthesis. So when they make energy from a chemical, chemosynthesis, when they make energy from the sunlight, photosynthesis. So there's no sunlight down there, so they need a different way to do it. So they were asking, someone was asking, let's go back to the picture of the bioluminescent animal real quick. Somebody's asking what that is. This is a deep sea worm. Just like the worms at home, right? No, not quite. The deep sea worms are pretty interesting animals. One of many things that use photosynthesis, or not photosynthesis, I was just thinking of the other topic, that use bioluminescence. Evelyn was the one that asking about who this is. So deep sea worms. Now, one of the cool things about bioluminescence in the deep sea is that up here, bioluminescence is pretty rare. Not a lot of things need to glow. Lightning bugs, and that's all I can think of. There's a few more things that do it, but not too much. In the ocean, though, bioluminescence is extremely common because it's dark in most of the depth of the ocean, so they need some kind of communication, camouflage, and other ways to interact in their environment. So a lot of things can bioluminesce, or they do something called biofluorescent, which is kind of like a glow-in-the-dark sticker. You shine it in the light for a little while, and in the dark, you can still see it. So some animals have that ability. They absorb some of that energy from the sunlight, not like photosynthesis, but just shining energy on them, and then they shine light back, like this fish does. So biofluorescence is more glow in the dark, but they're not making the light inside their body. They're reflecting the light. Like a mirror reflects light into another direction, but instead, let's say the mirror absorbed the light, waited for a little while, then shot it out. That's kind of what the fish is doing. Bioluminescence is when something inside is making the light. Let's go back to the lightning bug example. There, inside the bug's body, is a reaction between two different substances, and it creates light. Okay. Well, that happens for a lot of animals, but instead of being green, like the lightning bug, it's more often blue. And you'll see more greenish yellow with biofluorescence. So there's a little bit different reaction, a little bit different setup going on, but these organisms, these animals, are recreating or reusing the light in a different way so that they can interact in their environment. So that's one of the many things animals have adapted to in the deep ocean. Because it's very dark, you need something to help you out. Let's think of other things that you need to survive in a deep ocean habitat. What are the conditions down there besides dark? We got dark. What are the struggles that they have to survive with? Is there a lot of water pushing on you? Have you ever been diving in a swimming pool? Like a big pool, not just like a backyard pool? Well, you can start to feel the pressure pushing on you. In the deep ocean, it's an incredible amount of pressure. So in 30 feet of water, which is like 3 stories of a building, so if you saw a 3-story building, that's about 30-ish feet. In that amount of height down in the water, you've increased the pressure on you by a lot. So if we're standing here at sea level next to the ocean, we have the whole atmosphere pushing on us. And it doesn't feel bad. Right? We're pretty normal. But a whole extra atmosphere pressure is pushing on you at 30 feet. So every 30 feet, you're increasing one more atmosphere of pressure. So imagine you had hundreds of atmospheres of pressure pushing on you. That's a lot of squish on your body, which is why we can't really free dive or dive without special equipment very deep. Now, fun creatures like this animal can live at these depths. Some animals have to stay in the deep, very, very deep ocean. They can't move up and down. Other animals have adapted ways to interact with that pressure both in the deep and at the surface. Things like sperm whales, elephant seals. Some birds can dive over 1,000 feet, like penguins. But then there's also fun things like the chambered nautilus, which will move up and down 2,000 to 3,000 feet. So their bodies have adaptations or abilities to survive where it allows them to go up to the surface and back down. Not super fast because that can be dangerous too. So Concha was asking, do animals that live in the deep sea ever get to travel up top? Well, the cool thing is things like birds and mammals, their rib cage, remember our ribs houses our lungs and our organs. You can't squish it because that hurts. Well, their rib cage can fold or compress a little bit, which allows them to get deeper in the water. As the water pushes and squishes them down, their ribs will actually compress and fold. Almost have, I think they actually have hinges in them to compress and let it squeeze them too much, and it actually isn't going to hurt them. And then when they come back up to the surface, their lungs will expand back to a normal size, and that's okay for them. Our bodies can't do that, so we can't dive 1,000 feet without special equipment. And then there's other animals that are invertebrates, no spine. They might have a shell, they might not, like a squid or an octopus doesn't have a shell. But their cousin, the nautilus, does. And because of the special nature of their shell, they have these chambers inside that act like ballast tanks. So if you ever see a boat riding too high or sinking a little too much, they have a pump that can pump water in and out of a special tank inside the boat that can help keep them at a special level in the water. Well, the nautilus gets to do that naturally. So some animals have very different adaptations to allow them to surface and dive. All right, so is the shell on the outer body or the skin see-through for some of these animals? Some of them, they have completely see-through bodies. If they have a shell, sometimes those shells could be translucent, which is kind of see-through, but not perfectly see-through. So a window, easy to see through, transparent, like a piece of glass or piece of plastic that's clear, you can easily see through it. If it's translucent, it's not very easy to see through. Think of like frosted glass, where you can't quite see what's going on. That is translucent. So sometimes their shells aren't perfectly see-through. As far as I know, most of the animals that are in the ocean don't have a perfectly see-through shell, except when they're little tiny plankton babies. And then as they grow up, it kind of colors in and they get more thick and more density to it, so it does fill in and it's no longer see-through. And so that's kind of how some of the glowing parts on some of these animals work. Or it's on that fish, it's part of their scales that are glowing. Good questions. One good question that I just saw is, how do you see your food? If there's no light, how do you know it's there? If we put a blindfold on you and sat you in a kitchen, could you tell if I was making cookies or lasagna? Or maybe we had a soda? How would you know that those things were around? Our other senses are helping, right? So even if we couldn't see it, our other senses help pick up that work. We can hear different things happening. Fish and animals in the ocean have extremely good hearing. Sound also travels much farther, much faster in the ocean, so you really do need a good sense of sound. But also they can smell or taste things that are happening around them. So something like an octopus, they don't have a nose to smell, but they can taste with their suction cups. And smell and taste is a very similar reaction. So instead of like chewing open every chocolate in the chocolate box. Like, no, I don't like that one. That one's, oh, that one's raspberry. I like that one. They can just kind of touch things and tell what they would smell like. And, ooh, I like the flavor of that. And they can eat it. So a lot of animals are using all their other senses to make sure that they can see what's going on. I don't know about you, but I may not want to always see that in the ocean. I think this picture's amazing. Some people are like, oh, it's so creepy. I love it, though. Because if there's no light, all these animals adapted very different body types and very different ways of doing things in the ocean. So some of them have huge eyes, like the flashlight fish. Others have almost no eye or very reduced eyes because they don't need any light to see anything what's going on. All their other abilities have taken over, and so they can use those. But in order for you to find your food, sometimes you have to attract it to you. So instead of just aimlessly looking for a cookie in the kitchen, what if you could get the cookie to come to you? Ooh, fancy. So something like anglerfish, they have, those things, those doodads on their foreheads. Well, that is an organ that has the bioluminescent bacteria that make the little light that attract things to it. So if there's no light and suddenly you see this shining thing off in the distance, oh, ooh, I wonder what that is. Well, if you get too close to that thing, you could end up somebody's breakfast or lunch. So that is one of the ways that they find their food, is they use their light to signal their food. Is like, ooh, what's fancy over here? And they can attract their prey to them. The flashlight fish is really cool because these little pockets under their eyes, they can open and close kind of like little window shutters, and they can either talk to each other, they can attract mates if they need to reproduce, but they can also kind of flash the lights in a pattern that might attract their prey near them. You can also confuse predators, so it's a dual ability. So you might be able to attract your prey to you or confuse a predator where it's like, I don't understand what's going on. All the lights are dancing in a weird pattern. Well, that's really advantageous if there's a group of you together that can do that. If it's just one little light, it may not completely detract a predator, but it may be very good for finding your prey. So all these fun, creepy creatures of the dark, I love all of them because they're just so different. They're just so interesting to me compared to all the things that live up here. Now, Concha's asking, since deep sea animals can adapt to the deep sea pressure, can they also adapt to different temperatures? That's interesting to think about because if you do have to go up and down, there's a big temperature difference. So let's go back to the example of like a sperm whale or a elephant seal. Those are the two mammals that can dive the deepest. They can both get to about 6,000 feet down. It gets pretty cold down there. So at the surface, even in a temperate climate like California, the water might be in the 60s. And for us, ooh, that's kind of cold. Well, not too far down, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 feet down, the water's in the 40s, or maybe even the 30s, depends on where you're at. These animals are getting to 6,000 feet down. So I think the coldest sections of the ocean are about 37 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty cold. So your body does have to be able to withstand cold depths and then go back up to the surface and it's warm. Now, what do these mammals have that helps them with that? They have this special layer inside their body. It's kind of like a jacket on the inside. Blubber. So blubber layers help whales and pinnipeds, seals and sea lions, dive to great depths and they can stay warm. But what about them? Do they have blubber? No. So some of them do only stay in one layer of water, and they are adapted to that very cold layer. So these are cold-blooded animals, which means the temperature of the environment is their temperature. And as long as that's a safe temperature for them, they're fine. An anemone is cold-blooded too. It doesn't actually have blood, but the term just means you are the water temperature. Anemones can be in tropical habitats. But if we put that tropical anemone in a deep-sea cold habitat, the temperature alone would be enough to harm them, but then the pressure would be another problem. So some animals can only live in one kind of pressure, one kind of temperature, or even one level of sunlight. Other animals have adaptations to move across all of the different ones of those. So a really interesting question to think about is how do they survive all these different factors of the deep sea? So we have amount of light, we have pressure, we talked about now temperature. That's a lot of stuff to deal with if you live in a deep ocean habitat. Finding prey when there's not a lot of stuff going on. But the cool thing about the deep ocean is that we think of it as this barren, open, empty space. It's really not. There's a lot of times that deep sea scientists are finding really interesting areas where there's a ton of sea life randomly. So stuff like this, like we looked at the picture of the hydrothermal vent. This area has a bunch of deep sea crabs and clams. It's not as empty as we think it is, but we have to go down there and explore to find out. We can't just be like, well, oh, yep, no, there's stuff there. We have telescopes that can see out to outer space, thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of miles away. We can't look 7 miles down just like, oh, I found a sea star. Doesn't work that way. How do we get down there? How do we explore only 7 miles away from us? A lot of people would travel more than 7 miles to visit the aquarium. And the ocean is only 7 miles deep at its deepest point. So what do we use to get down there? We have to have special equipment. Oh, we have a class of first graders from New York who want to know if an octopus can swim and live in the deep sea. There are deep sea octopus. Now, since you're first graders, you have to be careful. Your teacher's going to want to look these up for you first because some of the deep sea octopus are kind of scary looking. But if you look them up, they're pretty interesting animals. They have special coloring that helps them hide. So if you are a red animal in the deep sea, it's kind of like having an invisible cloak because there's no red light that you'd be able to see that red octopus with. So there's something also like the vampire squid. There's more squid in the deepest parts of the ocean than octopus, but there's some deep sea octopus. Good question. And most octopus don't really swim. They more often crawl and walk around with their arms, but they do have to be able to move. All right, so a good question came in of how long do anglerfish live, and what are the other fish that were on that screen? I love all their pictures. I have no idea what all of those fish were named. There are so many kinds of fish that have very interesting names, and there's also so many that we haven't figured out who they are yet because we have to wait and see if somebody else found it first. So they're discovering a lot of new fish. So unfortunately, I can't name all those fish on there, but the length of anglerfish lifespan is about 30 years. So Amanda had to look that one up. I didn't know that fun fact. Oh, so they're looking at the green eyes with the glowy white kidney bean part. Well, let's go back to the picture and see if I can figure out who's got the kidney beans. Like this one? Is that the one you're thinking of? I don't even know what that is. I'm assuming it's a fish because the rest of these over here are fish, but I'm not quite sure who that is. Yeah, Amanda said it kind of looks like a barrel eye fish, maybe a different view. Now, there's so few pictures of barrel eye fish. It'd be cool if that is one. Now, that's not super scary of an animal to look up, but there's only a couple, maybe 3 published photos of barrel eye, like a big barrel eye fish. Look them up. There's only been a few people that have seen one ever. And the cool thing about barrel eye fish is that it looks like they've got these green, weird eyes pointing forward. It's actually their nose. Their eyes only point straight up. They don't really turn their head at all. They're just this big tube of a fish. They have a clear forehead. Their eyes are inside their forehead, and it just looks up. Well, if you're looking up, you can see, they have giant eyes. If there's any light above you, you can see the shadows of any potential prey above you. So barrel eye fish are pretty cool. I definitely recommend you look them up too. We don't have any pictures of them because we can't show off any picture we want to. We do have permission from some people, like this friend right here, and our friends at NOAA, that give us some information that we can share with all of you. So if we can't show it to you, I definitely recommend you spend some time looking it up on your own and with the help of an adult, because sometimes some of these things are made up, some of these things are weird sites. So make sure you're going to scientific websites to make sure you're getting the good stuff. Okay. What were we going back to? Oh, lots of life where you wouldn't expect it to be. So that picture of all those deep sea clams and crabs, the hydrothermal vent, there's deep sea corals. So coral, like that Shark Lagoon, if it were real coral, would be using sunlight and filtering plankton out for food. Deep sea coral might still filter out plankton for food, but there's no sunlight. And the interesting thing is scientists are finding more and more species of deep sea coral. And deep sea coral is a little more resilient or able to survive very strange conditions as compared to our surface corals, like at a coral reef around tropical islands. So here's some of the coral, and these are tube worms. The cool thing about tube worms is their red body is caused by hemoglobin. Do you remember what hemoglobin is? It's a protein in our blood that makes our blood red. Now, they don't have blood. They do have hemoglobin in their bodies that makes them red. And hemoglobin can store oxygen. So they can store oxygen inside their bodies. They grow these tubes that they live in. So it's kind of like growing your own home, like a shell. But they don't walk around. They don't move. And some of those tube worms can get, I think, 4 or 5 feet tall and pretty big around in some cases. The cool thing about the deep sea like this is that you can't quite tell what the scaling is. So some of these things could be really big and you have no idea because there's not someone like, look how big I am next to it. Because we're not outside swimming around like, okay. Remember we said we have to use special equipment to go explore that space. We're using deep sea submarines. We're using remote operated vehicles where the subs don't even have people in them. So that's something else to think about. Is if you want to go explore the deep ocean, it's kind of like exploring space. You need special equipment, you need special teams, and you need a lot of people with a lot of different life experience to do it. So you need people to drive the sub, so you need people that know how to drive these things. You need the scientists that be like, I know what that is. That's a crab. Or something more complex. You need people to drive the boat. You need people to work on the boat. So if you want to help explore deep ocean spaces, there's a lot of different career paths that you could have if you want to help do that. You could be the scientist in the room figuring out what the animals are. You could be the lab technician helping prepare samples and clean samples so you can figure out what things are. You could be the engineer that helps keep the remote operated vehicles running correctly. So there's a lot of different careers if you want to help explore the deep ocean one day. Now, these deep sea vehicles, I think the deepest ones that are unmanned are maybe 4,000 meters, which is around 12,500 feet, so over 2 miles. So the cool thing is we can get very easily with some of these kinds of vehicles to about 2 miles deep. If you want to go to the deepest spots, it takes some effort because the deepest part, the Mariana Trench, is 7 miles, which is around 37,000 feet deep. And to give you an idea of just like how much space that is, the tallest mountain from sea level is Mount Everest. It's like 29,000 feet. Well, if you chopped off Mount Everest at the bottom and you shoved it in the trench, you still have about 8,000 feet of water to deal with. And a sperm whale can't even get that far down. So it's pretty deep compared to other things that we reference around us. Now, our friends in New York are asking, have you seen any deep sea creatures in person? Oh, I wish. The only things I've seen in person were like a nautilus. We had a nautilus exhibit for a while. We had things called pinecone fish. Those are pretty cool. They are also bioluminescent, but not as much as other animals. Currently, we do have some of those flashlight fish. So those are some deep sea animals. The flashlight fish, the pinecone fish, the nautilus can vertically migrate. They can move up and down the water column, like Concha was asking before about how do they do that. Is that possible? So we have had some here at the Aquarium of the Pacific. Now, the other cool thing is I've been to a museum where they had a specimen of one of those giant squid. They're like 60 feet long, huge, huge animals. Kind of looks gross because their bodies are pretty fragile, and when you preserve one, it's still very fragile. But I've seen one in a museum, so that is really cool too. I think we have a couple last-minute questions. So I have a couple more questions coming in, and then we'll have to have you go explore on your own, exploring more about the deep ocean without us. Maybe while Amanda's finishing up the questions, can we play the video of our ostracods where we have some bioluminescent plankton called ostracods. And what we can do is when we kind of grind them up, it opens up their little plankton bodies, and then we mix it with water and we can see the bioluminescence. So this is a video we took here in the studio. Those things are the ground up ostracods. Don't worry, I just turned out the lights. We didn't lose feed, don't worry. Now, when we mix the water, that is the effect we can see. So the bioluminescence also has to be in the presence of water. When the ostracods are dried out, we can't see the reaction. But if we add water to it, we can see the chemical reaction. Now, the other thing to think about is it happens very quick. When we grind up a few ostracods and mix it with water, the light only lasts about a minute. It's not a very long process. So the bacteria that make these chemicals in these bodies of these animals, they have to constantly make that chemical in order to cause a reaction. So lightning bugs use up those chemicals every time they glow. So they have to make more. Ostracods make more of those chemicals to mix together so that they can create the light. If they don't make more, they can't make more light. It's kind of like running out of batteries in your flashlight really fast. If you had a flashlight that only lasted a second, yay! Oh, dang it, gotta put more light. It's pretty quick reaction. Takes a lot of processing and energy for them to keep making those chemicals. Now, all right, our last good question is from Katja. Have these been have these discoveries of prehistoric marine life in the deep sea, are they kind of like dinosaur discoveries? Yeah. So people are looking for new things all the time. Paleontologists are exploring spaces they are predicting dinosaur bones to be, or other prehistoric creatures to be. If you just randomly dig in a spot, you may or may not find something. So they look in places that they're pretty sure would contain fossils. Well, explorers, they'll go to places they're pretty sure contain things to take samples of, but the deep sea people are doing a little bit more open exploration. They're wandering around a lot, hoping they find something, because it's much less explored down here than it is around the surface of the Earth. We know more about what the surface of other planets look like than we know what the deep ocean contains. Now, there's a lot of ships that are mapping the deep ocean with special sonar, but we haven't really been down there and taken pictures of every space. So even if we mapped a lot of those areas, we haven't really taken a quick look with these vehicles. And sometimes when you watch things like NOAA's deep sea vessels, when they're exploring, things like the EV Nautilus, you'll actually hear the scientists in the booth that are talking to the public, because you can live watch it and tweet them questions. They're like, wait, go back, because they have suddenly discovered something fun. And one of our favorites that we were all watching last year in the office, everybody was watching it, was when they found a whale fall. So a whale had died and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and now there's this new ecosystem that's created. Well, they had no idea it was there. And so they find it suddenly. And now they can take a lot of samples, they can report what's going on, they can identify the species that are hanging out there. And so it becomes this very fun new discovery that they had no idea was going to be there when they showed up. So it's a little more exciting, I would say, than paleontology, because there's really not any idea of what should be down there. Whereas a paleontologist and a geologist go, that rock layer should have fossils. We just have to try and find them. The scientists are like, well, the ocean has stuff. Maybe we find it. Because there's also times you find nothing. And that's just part of science. All right, my friends, we ran over time today, but you had great questions. Thank you all for texting in our Ask a Scientist Deep Ocean segment. We appreciate your participation. Tomorrow, we're going to have more fun. Tomorrow is Thursday. We're going to be doing some crazy crustaceans and animal health care. So at 9 o'clock, if you want to learn about crustaceans, tune in. If you're more interested in healthcare, you can tune into the 10 a.m. program. But also, if you have more questions, email us at live@lbaop.org, and our educators will help you explore more on your own. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we'll see you all next time.